Hey, Mr. Lake, I'm here to talk about the Module 1 discussion-based assessment, which is about the basically America back in colonial times. Wasn't talking to you, Cotton, silly old dog. But yeah, here it says in the crash course video, Natives in English, John Green makes the following statements. What's the point of even telling these bloody stories about massacres and atrocities? One point is to remind ourselves that much of what we learn about American history, like all history, has been cleaned up to conform our mythological view of ourselves. There are two ideas here. The first is the purpose of retelling bloody stories, and the second is the notion that we have a mythological view of ourselves. Using the events from this module, be prepared to discuss this idea with your teacher. Obviously, we won't be talking in person because I'm doing the video section, but yeah, I think that basically it's extremely important to learn history, and some people, like stated above, say, what's even the point? Well, those who do not know much about history have no idea how much things have changed, even in the last, 100, 150, 200, 300 years, just like that, how different, more reformed we are now. For example, like ancient America, it wasn't near what it is today, nor was it even us. It was Native Americans, basically, those such as the Maya, Inca, Olmec is one of them, and the Aztec societies. Those were first way back in ancient America. And then, but basically, the reason we learn this stuff is to know, well, for one, is so we can learn from mistakes we may have made to make sure that they don't happen again. That's probably one of the biggest reasons we learn history. And two is so we can, it's kind of cool to know about our past and how things were back then, how different things were back then, such as just when the colonists came. Slaves, for example, that's something that you wouldn't even imagine having someone as a slave, but it was the norm back then, I mean, these people were treated like objects, 3/5 of a person, actually. And yeah, I mean, they weren't paid or anything, they were property, and that's all they did was work. And we talk about having racism in today's society, which may or may not be true. I don't know. I guess it's kind of opinionated on what you consider racism or not. Anyways, like, back then, that was real racism. The fact that people were brought from their home country over to here, beaten, put to work, and if they didn't work, they were killed. They were torn apart from their families. And you don't really realize the severity of that until you actually read into this stuff. And I think that's another reason why it's so important. It also, we learn from our mistakes, and now that's not even fathomable these days because of that. So that's another one big reason why history is so important. Another is you learn how hard life was, even for the white people, I guess, back then. Life wasn't easy. I did some research about kind of like everyday life in the colonies. For example, like in the middle colonies, most people were farmers, and it's not like today where they have $1 million equipment, nor to where they can just sit in their tractor, plow a field, and do all that stuff. Most of this was manual labor, and it's not like everyone had slaves. Usually only the wealthy had slaves to do that work for them, to where they could sit in their manor and do whatever wealthy people did back then. I don't know, but a lot of these people were average people, especially in the middle colonies, where there's a lot of ethical differences, and most people were pretty average, and there's quite a bit of farming that went on in the middle colonies, a lot more in the southern colonies, and then not really at all in New England area, just because it was so rocky, not adequate, really cold. But basically, everyday life of the average person back then, it was just manual labor, hard work. You had to work all day, no matter what the temperature was, or if you were sick or not, and you had to do that just to survive. You didn't get any luxuries out of that at all. That was just the everyday life. I mean, if you didn't do that, you died. That's just barely got you by enough to get food for you and your family and the necessities that you needed. It's throughout the year too. It's not you work for a few months, maybe like 8 months out of the year, and then you get a break. It's not that you didn't make enough money, and it was such a new country that there was no type of financial aid or anything like that. You worked or you died, and that's basically how it was, unless you were lucky enough to be someone who was really wealthy, and that wasn't very common as much in the middle colonies, I don't believe. I could be wrong, but yeah, it's just you had to work hard to make a living, and that was it. Men usually did the manual labor, and women took care of the household. And that's kind of how that was back then. That's another thing that I feel, that's another reason why I feel history is so important, just because a lot of people, I'm not saying everyone, because some people have it pretty hard nowadays, but a lot of people, you know, it goes easy for them. And usually the people who complain the most don't have anything hard going for them, you know, and I think that's why this is so important, is mainly because of that reason. Oh, it's getting a little long. Also, when he's kind of talking about the mythological view of Americans, we were a lot different society back then. I mean, everything was different. It was insane, actually, just to think about how much we differ now than we did back then. Such as, and one good example is the Salem witch trials, which people were being claimed to be witches. Usually it was kind of a battle between the Catholics and the Celtics, because they had different opinions on whether women should be obedient to men and stuff like that and such. But people were being accused of being witches, and a lot of people got hung for it, and it was a pretty big deal. But basically, it's the belief in the supernatural, and specifically in the devil's practice of giving certain humans, witches, the power to harm others in return for their loyalty, had emerged in your blah, 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 blah. But yeah, but that, you don't see that nowadays. You don't, if you heard someone with today's science and how far we are in research, we know quite a bit now, but you'd see that kind of stuff, and someone yells that, like, oh man, there's a witch, you don't automatically go and hang the person that's being claimed a witch. You probably think of the person screaming that as a crazy person, and you try to get them mental help or something like that. It's completely different now than it was back then, and I think, yet again, that's another reason why history is so important, especially with the bloody and massacres and atrocities. It's just a big part that we have to learn, because it really helps us know, really helps us fix mistakes, you know, that we've caused. And such as example is, even though this isn't really related, but I'll say it anyways, the Holocaust, for example. People say, well, why do we always talk about the Holocaust and learn about it? It was a terrible thing, so many people died. And that's why we learn about it, is because of how terrible it was, and because so many people died, it's something you want to catch. So if we learn everything about that, in some country we see leaders start to go down that path, we can do something about it, we know something about it, so we can prevent millions of people dying. But basically, yeah, this is getting a little long, but I think that's all I gotta say. Used a few examples. Yep, that's all. Thank you.